All right, let me finish up this New Deal. So again, the New Deal, this is we get the Democrats, the liberals taking over, the people believe in a large government interjection into the economy because these free markets have flaws. Uh, Hoover's and the Republicans belief that the free markets could basically self-regulate itself and eventually get better. The Great Depression wasn't working out, so the population turned, of course, to the other philosophy of the time, this liberal New Deal that FDR is the epitome of. So make sure when you do the New Deal, again, talk first about the financial implications of the New Deal, the Emergency Banking Act, the FDIC, the SEC, these organizations that are around to the day today to try to regulate these free markets and again try to fix some of these flaws, be prepared to overcome some of the flaws of the market. Look at the Glass-Steagall Act, where basically banks are broken up into two separate kind of banks. Your risky investment banks that work with the stock market, and then your more sound, steady commercial banks that loan money out to people and businesses. And again, this is the federal government going in and breaking apart private businesses. Uh, Antitrust laws, of course, were used with the TR and Taft and Wilson, but the Glass-Steagall is a level above that, where they basically break companies into two, these banks. So with the second New Deal, again, they're trying to again fix more of these problems of this free market, and again, the Wagner Act should be listed because it's against still in effect to this day. That creates the National Labor Relations Board. Again, these are the people, the policemen of the government that protects workers' rights and the right to bargain collectively and join a union. So the Wagner Act is very important because remember the 1920s when labor unions were suppressed and basically people joining labor unions, the numbers went down drastically in the 1920s, and it really suppressed wages. And income inequality really rose in the 1920s. Um, so the Wagner Act is basically this way to counteract this big business and its power over labor. Social Security Act, again, please don't do this essay if you can't understand what the Social Security Act does. Look it up. If you go to the Social Security website, they have a little part on the history of the Social Security Act. Same thing with the FDIC and the SEC. They all have their own websites and they talk a little bit about themselves. So if you do this question on the final, excuse me, on the midterm, make sure you understand those organizations. Of course, we do have aid for farmers. The Rural Electrification Administration is bringing electricity to areas where it wouldn't be economically viable for companies to uh, hook up to the electricity grid because you got two small farms that are miles and miles apart. Again, the next city is miles apart. It's really expensive to hook up these farms, and it doesn't pay economically for an electric company to do that. So the Rural Electrification Administration has the government basically helping these companies, these electric companies, hook up these people. So it's a fair thing to do. Since it goes back to the progressive era with TR. The WPA is where we put people to work, and again, there is a WPA art. They actually hired artists to do work. You can still see once in a while a museum will have a showing of WPA art. The National Housing Act, of course, is we get the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, comes out of this, where we have all these projects in New York City. You will see them from the 1960s, these projects, and this is part of the federal program where people are going to be homeless if they're living in these Hoovervilles at the time of the Great Depression. Government will step in and basically try to house people. So of course the farm tries to get solved with the Agricultural Administration, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. where they tried to raise prices for farmers. And here, how do you raise prices? The government basically paid farmer to destroy their crops. And again, 10 million acres of cotton were basically destroyed. And this is a quick way. It seems strange, I know. Again, they killed a lot of little baby pigs too. Um, why did they do this? Because this immediately will raise the price for farmers, right? If you cut the supply in these food and textile products, the price will go up, and that rising of prices will help farmers. It does seem strange when people are going hungry in the Great Depression to destroy food, but it does work on the farms. Yes, you can read more about the Agricultural Adjustment Act if you're interested in farming. But again, the Wagner Act and the Social Security Act, these two are key things I think you should mention in this New Deal. Because again, of course, Social Security is still around to this day. It's a payroll tax, right? The government is basically forcing you as a worker to save for your retirement and save in case there is an accident. It's like basically the government is forcing you to pay life insurance. So it's controversial then. Some people it's controversial now. Yeah. There's more and more about the Social Security. Of course, there are a bunch of big projects going on too. The Shasta Dam in California, but this is government sponsoring these big, huge projects to try and stimulate the economy. So I don't care about the Federal Reserve, but one of the problems with the New Deal, right? This government involvement, it was expensive, basically, and it's stimulating the economy. They tried to stimulate the economy. A lot of conservatives say that actually it doesn't stimulate the economy, and it takes resources away from the private markets and puts them into the government spending. So instead of being used efficiently in a capitalistic society, in a free market society, the government involvement really will prolong the Great Depression. And conservatives to this day, a lot of them believe that the New Deal basically prolonged the Great Depression. And are they right? It's a difficult question. Yeah, there's a movie, a couple of movies here I'm going to ignore. FDR talking and trying to convince the people that he's doing the correct thing. But here, one of the things that goes on in the New Deal is the federal government, of course, is spending more than it's taking in taxes. And there's a budget deficit. And it's the first time we've had a budget deficit, a large federal budget deficit, not in a wartime. So Roosevelt was a little alarmed by this. People in business were a little alarmed by this. And they cut back on spending in the middle of the Great Depression, the federal government. And then when they cut back on this spending in the mid-30s, the Depression got worse. So there's again, the famous economist John Maynard Keynes comes up with the idea, well, he writes his famous book on the general theory on employment. And basically he says that when there is a recession, and again, Keynes is important because Democrats are basically Keynesian today, right? Keynes dies in 1947, but he's still very important. Obama was a Keynesian. He will say he was a Keynesian. But Keynes says if there's a recession, that basically to stimulate the economy, government must spend more. Because Keynes breaks the economy into three separate things. And here's this famous formula here, this general theory of employment, interest, and money. Yeah, it's in the library, this book. Don't pick it up. It's too complicated to read. But when there's a recession, again, he looks at GNP, gross national product, gross domestic product, same sort of thing. It's a little difference. But this is where we measure basically all the output in this country, right? So if this is going down, if GNP or GDP is going down, right, Keynes breaks it into three things: consumer spending, investment in spending by businesses, and government spending. So you and I buying stuff from consumers, businesses buying stuff with investments, and then government spending. So if consumer spending is down, which is in the Great Depression, for Keynes, what you have to do on this equation to get the GNP up again is government must play a role in spending more. And again, this is what Mr. Obama does in 2008 during the last Great Recession. There's a huge spending bill, $700 billion, basically the federal government puts into the economy, hiring teachers, hiring policemen, working on roads. And that hopefully, some people would think it made it so the Great Recession was not the next Great Depression. So John Maynard Keynes, right? This is the question I'm going to ask, multiple choice question. He is the guy that comes up with this theory: in a recession, governments must spend more to stimulate the economy. All right, yeah, Mr. Keynes. Yeah, we'll talk more about him. Like with some things with this, the New Deal programs, some of the stuff was racist again, and sexist. Some of these New Deal programs. Eleanor Roosevelt was instrumental in trying to fix some of the problems. But for example, the Social Security Act, domestic servants and waitresses were not part of Social Security. It was basically more for men because back in those days, right, men were generally the wage earners, so it was more geared toward the men of the family, not like it is today. With minorities, of course, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that hired a bunch of workers in the beginning of the New Deal, they segregated black workers. The NRA codes, again, this is this National Recovery Act. This act was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, so it doesn't really last that long. But it probably tried to set wages for workers and the prices that private businesses could charge. So tried to set the wages businesses paid and tried to set the prices businesses could pay. Of course, this was unconstitutional. But it did try to have lower wages for African Americans. So he does actually do a fair amount of things with Eleanor is pushing to try and advance African Americans in our society. All right, so I'm not going to talk about Russia. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to probably do this as I'll say in my email. I'll try to I will set up a online meeting probably Saturday morning because there is the midterm on Monday, and I will go over some of the essay questions again on the midterm, and you can come in and ask questions, right? I'll email you out a link to the session on Saturday morning, probably around 10 o'clock. And then, so if you study a little bit before Saturday morning, I don't want to make it Sunday morning because some people say it's too late. Our midterm is Monday, so I will record the session and send a recording if you want, but you can feel free to come in and ask me questions in the review session. All right. Email me if you got any questions. How do I turn this thing off?